So, a very good morning and a warm welcome to another edition of the UN 75 webinars that we've been facilitating since 4 weeks ago. And we've delved into different topics with different personalities from different walks of life as we continue just exploring different issues to do with the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as, of course, looking at what you and I can begin to do today to ensure that our present realities and our future is shaped for the better. My name is McDonald Kurura, and this is a special UN webinar. Now, of course, remember, if you want to participate in change, not only for your life today, but also for your children and possibly your children's children, this is the simple thing that you can do. You can go ahead and log on to www.un75.online, fill the 1 minute survey there, and you'll be able to answer questions that are there in that small questionnaire. It won't even take you more than a minute, but it will definitely bring positive change to not only your surroundings, but even the future. Now, today we are looking at surviving and thriving during and post COVID-19 inspired lockdown. I mean, as we all know, the whole world and life as we know it stood a distance. So at the early part of this year, when the novel coronavirus just came onto the scene, and different nations, different solutions and remedies, one of which included the lockdowns that Zimbabwe also had. And, it's been a few months, and to a certain extent, there is, a different perspective of the future. Some it's wait and see, some it's just get on ahead with it. But we've invited different professionals onto this particular webinar to just get their opinions, their take, and what they went through during and post lockdown. Of course, from our panelists today, we have. I will start with we've got Tony Friday. Tony Friday is, of course, a founder and a director. Now, I want to read this. I want to say it carefully, so I'm just going to be reading. So, if you would excuse me there, Tony Friday is the director and founder of the Global Institute of Emotional Health and Well-being. We've also got Chido Chendo, who is the change catalyst, and she's with an organization called Yoke Africa. We've also got Soraya Essof, who is the director and founder of Kites and Peace. We've got Tendai Emmanuel, who is, of course, a sustainable development goal specialist, as well as philanthropist and author. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time off your very busy schedules to be with me on the show this morning. Just kick it off. We'll just get straight into it. Tony, good morning and thank you. We may start with you.
Thank you so much, man. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's always great to talk about the thing that I love the most, which is mental health. And mental health is so key and fundamental to our survival as human beings. Mental health is the anchor to every area of our lives, be it our health, our finances, our spiritual lives, our relationships, and even how we do in business. Everything is anchored in mental health. And I'm excited to just come here and, share a couple of lessons we've learned during COVID.
All right, there you go. Thank you so much, Tony. And from Tony, we'll go into Soraya. If you can come in and you can give us your contribution.
Hi, McDonald. Thank you so much for inviting me back onto your show. 2020 was a year of unexpected change, and change is an issue that we all grapple with. So this is something that's very interesting to me, is how we adapt to change and how we're so resistant to change. And you often find the people who survived and thrived through this pandemic and through this year were the ones that were the most adaptable and most accepting of the change. Of course, we were all in shock, and it's been very interesting time, and rocky roads and roller coaster for all of us, most of us, if not all of us. And I think I'm quite interested to discuss how we all tackled this change. And I think change is something that, the only constant is change. So I'm quite interested to discuss this topic from a change point of view, and how being adaptable to change can actually affect our positively influence our mental and physical well-being. So yeah, that's the kind of angle that I'm going to be taking today. Is I'm going to be talking about resistance and acceptance of change. But yeah, I'm excited to be here and hopefully share a bit of my experiences as well, and to learn from everyone else.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Tonight, if you can. Hello, tonight. Can you hear me? All right, tonight. Okay, we'll get to tonight since we have a bit of a technical one right there. If you could in here your opening.
Hello. Yes, I'm pretty excited to be talking about this. This is a topic I'm really passionate about. As Soraya was saying, 2020 was unprecedented at most. People had to cope with things that they were pulled from the status quo, and they didn't know or how to deal with the things that they were dealing with, because it was the first time most of the people were facing things like isolation and lockdown. So yeah, I'm really coming in from mental health perspective, talking about how people were surviving through things that affected not only their mental health, but also their finances, the economic stature of their lives, their religious beliefs, their social beliefs. A lot of things really did change, and that's the angle that I'll be taking today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we conclude our conversation. Remember to go ahead and give us your contribution on this platform. That's on 263 Chat on Facebook as well as on Twitter. Tonight, I see you back. If you could come in with your own submissions.
I'm back.
Fantastic.
Okay. Thank you for on your show. I am looking forward to engaging with the other panel. I think this time of the key factors and my co-speakers certainly around mental health. And for me in particular, in the lines of my work, that's health and well-being for older people, so I'll be focusing my talk around that, but as well as domestic violence. I think when we're talking about the general well-being of our communities, we have to look at domestic violence in all its forms, against the family, against the man, and against the children. In family units. So that will be my contribution, will be centered around that.
All right. Thank you very much for that. And now let's just dig straight into it. I will start off with you, Soraya. You can go ahead, Soraya.
Hi, I can hear you.
Fantastic. Let's talk about your personal experiences in this lockdowns. Your personal experiences from a perspective of being a social being who's now forced to be socially distancing, as well as a person who's in the space of pushing humanitarian ideas from an idea of unity and oneness and peace. Tell us a bit about your experience.
Okay. Okay. Before I get into my personal experience of this, when the word social distance came about, it made me cringe. Because what we needed at that time that all of this was unfolding and this kind of horror was being unleashed upon us, of all the deaths and this it was sort of a silent assassin, and people were afraid to do anything. The word social distance was to me a misnomer. It was we needed. I think what they meant was physical distance. So we need physical distance from each other. But what we actually needed at that time was social solidarity, So it was an opportunity, and it still is an opportunity for us to, as you say, oneness, for us to unite against or together in a global crisis, something that has affected every single person on this planet. I mean, I think only people living on isolated remote islands that do not have any contact with the rest of the world are the only ones who are not affected by this. So it was something that it was an opportunity for us to unite against a shared experience, or to unite in it. So social distance, to me, kind of created this thing that, we're now all apart. But actually, what it did is, I mean, it enhanced platforms like Zoom and WhatsApp calling and Skype and that sort of thing. And people started remote working. And yes, sure, of course, I mean, we miss the physical touch of others. We miss shaking hands. We miss hugging our loved ones. So there is physical distance, and of course that affects our well-being. But I think the social solidarity that has emerged from this is quite profound. You'll find people who were unable to travel for whatever reasons, for financial or whether they had work, are now able to attend weddings and funerals and birthdays. There is a flip side to the social distance, which is actually the physical distance, is that these platforms have become more enhanced. So look, that's a positive way of thinking of it. But I think to say that we're isolated, it's not really true. We are definitely isolated physically for our safety, but I think I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think we should perhaps celebrate that, and kind of just keep pushing that we're stronger. We're doing webinars with people from all over the world, and even though that was there before, it's now more of a common thing. For example, a Rotary Club, can now have presenters from all over the world. You're not only limited to somebody, a specialist within your town who's available on that day, on that time. So it kind of has opened up a different portal. So in that sense, I think we should appreciate that, and we should kind of celebrate that and look at that in a positive light. But yes, I definitely the physical thing is different. I miss my friends. I miss my family that I can't see, and being with them physically, it's not quite the same. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably more in touch with my family overseas and elsewhere, probably more now than we were pre-COVID. And yeah, just because we've actually missed the little bits of time that we would have spent together. So that's one way of looking at the whole social distance. Personally, yeah, I actually appreciated the pause. I appreciated not having the hecticness and the schedule and the calendar of you've got to be here this day and this time, and it's hectic, and our lives are hectic, and we kind of forget how busy we are, and we're always on the go, and we fill up our calendar without putting slots in there for rest. And I'm doing nothing. We keep saying I'm doing nothing between this time and this time, but actually you are doing something. You're resting, and rest is a very important part of a schedule, which we should never undermine, because this is our well-being. When our well-being, when we don't have rest, then we do not operate at maximum capacity. So it's the same with work. If workplaces would appreciate that people need breaks and they need rest, and they need mini lockdowns sometimes as well. then it would far improve the performance. So yeah, I think on a personal level, I did appreciate the break.
Can you say that to my boss, please? That you need time to rest. I just had to jump in there and say, if I need time to rest. But anyway, you can continue.
Yeah. So no, but definitely. I mean, I work in human resources. I'm a qualified human resource specialist. So, and this is something that's often neglected is we keep pushing goals. We keep pushing productivity goals and performance goals. And, a human being is like, we don't want to be, but we're like machines, even a machine needs a break. And even a machine needs sometimes, you'll call tech support and they'll say, just turn it off and turn it on again. We can't explain why. We can't explain why the turn off and turn on button works, or turn it off and turn it on again. We can't explain it. But that reset is so important. And I think for people who really thrived, is they looked at the lockdown as that, they looked at all these restrictions as, wow, this is actually a time for me to now reset. And there's all this uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how safe we are. We don't know what's happening with our finances. But let's just take time to actually breathe and pause and kind of re-strategize and realign. So I think for the people who could afford the mental clarity to do that, I think those are the ones who survived. And I mean, it's not too late. It's not too late to adopt that way of thought and say all these restrictions actually might be a very necessary pause, might be a very necessary reset for us.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And I'll ask you to write, just a little half page.
No problem.
Today, your experience, I know you were very busy during lockdown outside of the work that you do, with the organization you're with. Then you've got your work with older people. You've got the book that you launched in Zimbabwe. And, in between travel and, the restrictions thereof and the demands and the standards, what has been your experience? And I know about, was it 2 weeks ago that the United Kingdom also now went back to high levels of lockdown in terms of how has your experience been?
So my experience of lockdown has been very interesting. It was quite frustrating. Surya, thank you for mentioning that it was a chance for a pause break. And I think that's actually a privilege for some and not for all. So I had that pause break. Didn't see it as a privilege to start off with. I found it frustrating not being able to travel as much as I usually travel, not being able to communicate in effectively person to person as I'm used to. However, it didn't stop the work, as Surya rightly points out, that we've been able to continue with the meeting. I've been able to continue with my speaking engagements using tools such as Zoom. But as I pointed out, this is a privilege for a few. But when we look at Africa or Zimbabwe as a whole, a lot of people don't have access to Wi-Fi or data, and if they do, it is quite costly. So in my line of work, where I work with vulnerable older people, particularly in rural areas, this has not been a privilege that they've seen. And in fact, the social distancing and the lockdown created a new vacuum, a new void, where when you're used to having family coming to visit you, that is no longer the case. And now you're limited to phone, and you've had solar to charge your phone. So it's created a distance, like a vacuum that needed filling. And unfortunately, our systems, not just in Zimbabwe, but across the world, they've had to respond to the pandemic in ways that we've had to innovate what we do and how we communicate. But unfortunately, that reaches rural communities last and has greatly impacted, in our experience via our organization, the mental health and well-being of vulnerable older people who already were facing isolation. In parts, the World Health Organization quotes that only 2% of national budgets across 130 countries interviewed was dedicated for mental health. And that's further been exacerbated when people are now facing loss, bereavement, and the lockdown situation in itself creates if you've got this vacuum as a separation from society, then that vacuum also seals you in. So the second topic I was referring to is in my work with the Magdalena Foundation, which is the UK's largest charity for Black and Asian and ethnic minorities who are surviving domestic violence. We've seen an unprecedented increase in the numbers of women, children, and men who are facing extreme forms of violence. So in terms of what has been my experience, overall, my work has gotten busier instead of less as the pandemic progressed. But I think it's also highlighted to me that as individuals now, what this world situation does, it really does put an emphasis on the need for community engagement, for being engaged with your family and your local community and actively participating in the well-being of that community. Listening out for your neighbors, being your brother's keeper, the things that we can all do, that we all participate in the health and well-being, particularly mental health of our society at large.
I'm going to ask you a question before I go on to Studio Prepares to come in. I'm just going to quickly ask you a question around the issue of mental health. We did put across the issue of mental health, and that statistic says the World Health Organization found out that in more than 130 countries, when we talk about budget figures dedicated to mental health, it was less than 2%. Now let's talk about this primarily in the Zimbabwe context. We can talk about it from 130 countries and from a global perspective, but let's bring it back to home. My question for you is that there is a perception, I don't know what your experience is, but there is a perception that especially in the I'm trying to find the nicest way to ask this question, but okay, let me just go for it. There's been a conception that with the majority of Black people in Zimbabwe, we don't consider mental health as a real thing. You know, things like depression, things like like delusional, behavior, issues to do with mental health. It's either mamepo, it's either, there's a spiritual explanation, and there is a tendency of not looking at it from a holistic perspective, where it's actually a condition that someone can live with, and somebody can be treated, and somebody can actually do something about it. What do you think is, if this has been experienced, what do you think caused that stigma, and how do we really get around it to actually acknowledge that this is, just as someone can get a flu, somebody can actually be mentally unwell?
I think you are right, and it's uncomfortable to put it that way, McDonald, but I think if we are going to experience social change, we have to be very blunt and forthright about what the issues are. And unfortunately, in our socialization in Zimbabwe, mental health is just one of those things that we don't like to talk about, as well as is domestic violence and gender-based violence. And when we do talk about them in our socialization, they are prevailing narratives. For example, as you're saying, we'll say mamepo, or something spiritual, or a demon needs to be cast out. What that does, it means sufferers of mental illness are then less comfortable to come forth early for earlier intervention. And then they end up getting worse and worse and worse, depending on what condition they are suffering from. It's similar with domestic violence, where victims of domestic violence, because of our socialization and these prevailing narratives like Garamu or Nofira Pamba, what happens is then people endure and ignore the early signs of domestic violence. They don't know who to seek counsel from, because potentially whoever you seek counsel from, whether it's the church or your local community, will judge you as failing at your marriage and not being able to endure as a good woman or as a good man, or in the case of children, people will pay a blind eye to someone violently disciplining their child and just sort of say, walk away and keep quiet instead of confronting that. So I think what, as I said earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused is that we now have these family silos where domestic violence is happening. Or if we're talking about mental health, people who are suffering don't feel free to come out because of our prevailing socialization rather. And I think the solution to that and how we can address that, I love that Zimbabwe via Dr. Dixon Chibanda pioneered the friendship bench. We have interventions that work in our community. The friendship bench with the Gogos worked. People were reaching out for mental health support at community level, and we need to extend that. But how we do that now during this pandemic is we have to consider that older people, should they contract coronavirus, face the chance of severe complications, even death. So we have to be very strict in terms of social distancing, washing hands, or let's call it physical distancing, if we are to continue and to roll out these services. And we also need to look at how we can train and engage our largest workforce, which is our youth, and deploy them in projects such as the Friendship Bench. They have worked, they're being copied internationally, and it is proudly a Zimbabwean initiative started by a leading Zimbabwean psychiatrist. So that's something that I'll talk about in that sense. And when it comes to domestic violence, I've been really interested to see more and more, like you're saying, via Zoom, the word getting out more and more that domestic violence is not acceptable, and that it's not just against women, it's against men and children as well. And so that, as I said, I think we've got a social change specialist here. It's about all of us getting involved, speaking up about that.
Thank you very much, Tendai. And Chido, as we get to you, I'm sure you already, I saw you're ready to say something. Already some issues have already come to the table, but you can go ahead with what you wanted to just start off for us. Hello, Chido, can you hear me? Maybe you can unmute your mic. Yeah, you can just unmute. Your mic is on mute. Let me see. Okay, there we go. All right. Chida, can you please unmute your mic? Maybe we can get each other. Okay, all right. We seem to be having a bit of some technical challenges with my guest, but there we go, Chida. Final, thank you. Oh wow, all right. See, the beauties of this whole dynamic of virtual communication, the glitches and everything that happens in between. We're laughing just at the time when I was with you, Soraya, and we're just talking about the blips and the blood and some of the things that you find out. But we will get it right. We'll get it right. We keep on doing it until we get it right. But, so yeah, Soraya, I'm sure you heard. I mean, you said you also practice HR, and these issues also spill over into the workplace. And let's talk about that dynamic where that person who has been employed for 30 years, this has been their reality since 3 decades ago. They used to wake up in the morning, their routine, 8 o'clock, by 7:15, 8, their workstation, and they've got a routine. 10 o'clock, it's morning tea. 1 o'clock, it's lunch, and the little makua's little gossip meal by the kitchen and everything, and then boom, out of the blue, right in front of you, stay at home. You can't come. That surely has an impact on somebody's mental process.
Yes, of course it does. So I think we forget that we spend more time at work than we do at at home, so having a work-life balance is very important. And I go back to what we were talking about, change, and this resistance to change. And a lot of people are so stuck in that rat race that they didn't realize that they've never taken time. They've never taken time off, or they've never taken time, or just a duvet day to be at home. And when they suddenly realize, oh, I can actually go to work. I can wear a suit. I can wear a shirt and a tie at the top, and I can be comfortable at the bottom, my pajamas. They kind of like, wow, this is actually quite nice. So there were advantages. There obviously are a lot of disadvantages. But yeah, of course, I think it does take a toll on your mental well-being, and especially like Chida was saying, people who feel that they kind of need to get out of their home environment. People who are victims of gender-based violence, or stressful home environments. The work was maybe an escape. It's the same with children. Children who are in households that are maybe abusive or uncomfortable. Going to school was kind of an escape where they could be with their friends and they could be in a safe, kind of controlled environment. So definitely, but on the most part, I think it's all about creating balance. And I think post COVID, I think a lot of workplaces are going to adapt and say, you know what, you don't need to come in today. Today you can work remotely, and you can be at home. It saves on commute, which is also a lot of which is very stressful for a lot of people. Traffic. I mean, personally for myself, not having to do the school run was amazing. I think that in itself cut my stress. Cut my stress down. I couldn't believe, wow, my kids can learn from home, and I don't have to do that commute. But again, that's a privilege, so a lot of people had to go to work, and it was an additional stress to say it's unsafe for me to get into public transport. I now have to make a plan, so there's both sides of the coin, depending on who you're looking at. But definitely, I think post COVID-19, I hope it's going to see a change in the way that we work. And I think it's a really shifted mindset about what is actually possible. So many people say, and I don't understand, but all those meetings that I had to go to, were they all necessary? You can do exactly the same thing from home. What were we doing? Why were we wasting so much time getting going to meetings when we could do exactly the same thing? Why was I traveling? Why was I leaving my family for 5 days to go for a meeting when we actually are achieving exactly the same thing via online? So I think with a bit of this perspective now that we have, I hope to see that the positive sides of the new workplace, the new normal in a workplace, will be adopted. And yeah, I'm positive that this kind of thing can be good for our mental well-being.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Raya. I hope that there are many managers and bosses, CEOs that are listening to this particular part of the conversation, especially said there are actually certain meetings that would have just been an email. It would just have been an email. Look at, well, you saved time. You saved your coffee and your biscuits and your water. Just an email. Okay. All right, you can go ahead and use your contribution.
All right. So for my part, what I experienced and what I saw firsthand is that when people heard that we were getting into this era of Corona and COVID-19, and it was possible for anyone literally to contract the disease, I think that was the first point of anxiety and stress for people, and to be able to manage that. And then there came a time where these new words were thrown to us, and they were supposed to be accepted as a new social norm, such as isolation and lockdown. And they are very abrasive and brutal words, because because they just mean that someone has to be, on their own. They depict a certain aura of loneliness, and people had to be, put into positions where they didn't have to socialize or have contact with the people that they usually did. The margin of the people that are in Zimbabwe live on a hand-to-mouth basis, or their daily salaries and their daily earnings. And we got to a point where this became a stress point for people, where they couldn't earn what they were usually earning, and that really affected the mental health of people from an economic and a social and even a religious point. People were no longer able to attend church, attend social gatherings that they were used to.
All right. Thank you very much for that. As we continue with our conversation. Now, I'm going to quickly read something, and it's talking about the change, but let's just talk about. I know it's maybe from a lofty or a far off idea, but let's just see that in perspective as we continue this conversation. I'm going to read for you something that I looked up on the internet, and this is, of course, according to the Guardian, and it says billionaires' wealth rises to $10.2 trillion amid COVID-19 crisis. And of course, this was talking about Jeff Bezos and just how his Amazon empire, it's hit huge to a record high of 10.2 trillion. This was in the same period that we're talking about where, if we're going to use money as a yardstick, if you want, for just looking at maybe it's because this kind of business was favored by this space where we find ourselves in, where almost everything is going virtual. That's another dynamic. But I didn't go into the full details of that particular story, but to just get a perspective with regard of how the previous paranoia of when other people were sinking and saying, let's scale down, let's shut up shop. Some were actually, on the other end and saying, okay, we're in this situation. It's a terrible situation, but how can we, get the best out of it? I don't know. Tendai, do you follow my train of thought, or maybe you disagree?
I do follow your train of thought, and I think like bringing that conversation home to Zimbabwe, our economy is predominantly informal. So what happened, you can imagine in the middle of this largely an informal market, a lot of people were not able to continue business the way that they used to, either because they didn't meet essential services or they're not a registered business and could not continue. So there was a real experience of loss, not only loss of business, loss of income, and mostly these businesses were supporting communities, not just my wife and kids, but my wife and kids and my extended family that I support via my earnings in my business. And if that is your only source of income, what then happened is an innovation to services. I know here in the diaspora where I am, is we started seeing an increase in the number of farmers and farm produce that was being offered via social media. Now, may not experience the same level of growth as Amazon, for the local farmer, and no longer just marketing in their local community or maybe the nearest city, but actually appealing to international markets. So that offered opportunities. But again, it's about to be able to participate in those growth opportunities. And I do know there were some meetings at Ledriz and other organization, the Department of Social Welfare, that they were participating in, and initiatives that they were rolling out to support the informal economy. But I hazard to say that we are not even scratching the surface. And as we continue and come out of lockdown, we need a more structured approach, more engagement, more investment into business owners who are in the informal market. and perhaps look at ways that we can, dare I say it, slightly formalize what they do so that we can be able, or that the ministries in charge, or organizations in charge, or community groups, or cooperatives are able to reach those informal market traders. In big business in Zimbabwe, we've seen a boom in our mining sector during this lockdown period. And so there's more and more people getting involved in mining, particularly small scale and artisanal mining in Zimbabwe. There's more people getting in and agro business. I've seen a lot of innovations around value addition. So more and more people are starting to look at, okay, I've got my maize meal now. I need to mill it and package it and perhaps bring it to market. And so innovations are good. There are few. We need more in order to stabilize our economy. To do that, we're all going to need to play a role. Our government needs to do more to support the informal market. The informal market needs to its price and how they can come further to the stabilization of the economy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. If you're just joining us, this is for UN 75 webinar, where we're looking at the issue of health and well-being. And we're joined in the studio today by Soraya and Tinai Chido. And Tony seems to be having a bit of challenges with the network, which seems to be erratic, which is another problem that we discovered is a huge problem during lockdown, when you need to make those business phone calls and the internet is unavailable, or the high cost of data, especially for those that are living in marginalized communities. So there's another story for another day to do with the telecommunications operators, because we need to get to a resolution. But I saw you nodding, Spry, when she was talking about the issue of adapting, when Tinai was talking about the issue of adaptation. And, they do say that there are three kinds of people in this life. If we're going to talk about surviving and thriving during and post-lockdown, the three kinds of people are these. There is a group that makes things happen. There is the group that watches things happen. And then the last group says, what happened? So yeah, we tend to be generally among one of those three groups. But I saw you not quite there when Tinai was talking about adaptation.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I touched on that before. I think all of us at first we were shocked, we were a bit wounded, and we were kind of licking our wounds. I don't think anybody kind of threw themselves immediately into how am I going to capitalize on this crisis? There might be the odd few clever person who says, okay, I thrive in times of crisis, and this is my opportunity to make money, and this is my opportunity to take advantage of people's fears, which they were. I mean, I think it did take a little bit of time, but certainly there were some very clever people who capitalized on it. But I think for the most part, a lot of people, and I still find now, they keep saying, when we go back to normal, when we return to normal. And then you have the other school who says the new normal. And I just keep thinking, how much of the old normal do we actually want to return to? How much of the old normal was actually serving us and serving humanity and serving our communities? Were we really, truly happy? I mean, we might have been stuck in a comfort zone. And I think we talked about this, we were talking about work. You're stuck in this comfort zone. You wake up, you know what your day is going to look like. You know what's going to happen next week. And you've got your calendar. And of course, there's a lot of chaos, especially in Zim. You don't know what's going to happen. But when people keep saying, when we go back to how it was, and I just think sometimes, there are certain things from our past that we should let go forever, and there are things that I think it would be a shame if we didn't come out of this with a lesson. If we didn't improve ourselves, if we haven't developed personally, if our business model, our ideas haven't evolved, I think we would have squandered this whole year. So people keep talking, and I get a lot of sideward glances when I say this, but people are like, when people say 2020 was the worst year, and they talk about it being, the worst year ever. And I actually said, actually, 2020 was a year for a year of learning. So it was a year of a pause, but it was also a year of learning. And boy, was it needed. It was so needed, because I don't know about you, but my 2018 and my 2019 were horrific years, personally, in my work, in my nonprofit work, and my business, and personally, it was an incredibly stressful time. And it was almost like the beginning of this year. It was like, gosh, it still seems to be carrying on. The stress of 2019 still seems to be carrying on. And then we had that sudden break, So for me personally, that change was needed. And these kind of lessons, as terrible as it is and as tragic, we've lost many lives, and I don't want to make light of all the people who've, like Tendai was saying, it's a privilege to say that you're actually getting something from this, when so many people are now hungry and homeless and jobless and without income. But there is a again, it's about that balance, so yeah, I don't know. I think we must be careful about how much of the old normal we want to rush back into, and kind of the things that have worked now and that are working for us now. For example, Tendai was talking about informal businesses and that sort of thing, and I think they've become quite innovative about not only what they're doing, but also how they do it. How do we cut costs? How do we cut costs on things? And even on a personal level, there was a time where we were like, gosh, what are we going to, supermarkets are so hectic, and we've got high risk people in our family. We don't want to risk it by going to the shops every day for another something. You know what? We started a garden. So, I mean, that's just a tiny example, but people start learning how to do things for themselves. A lot of people all over the world started baking bread for some reason. For some reason, people were baking bread, but it's all about, kind of finding ways to sustain yourself. What is actually necessary? Do we need all of these things? A lot of people buy things, spend money on things that they don't really need. And I think this year was proof to say that, we couldn't go shopping. And you know what? We're actually fine. And, I didn't I haven't bought a dress for 10 months. But you know what? What I have in my closet is actually fine. And we can make do with it. So I think it's taught us a lot of lessons, personally and otherwise. And I think we'd be foolish not to learn from this experience of 2020.
Thank you very much, Raya. And tonight, I know, let's talk a bit about, we know we're wrapping up now. Let's talk about the work that you did during Corona. You came up with you went off the beaten track, literally, off your beaten professional track. Obviously, born creative, always a creative, but professionally, you're on this path, and then, boom, lockdown happened. Tendai is launching a book. Oh my goodness.
Yes. It was a lot of time to reflect, and like Soraya was saying, it's a lot about also personal growth, personal development, and there's a way that you can look at that can be so inward and not good for you. But it was good for me to start expressing myself artistically as well, and to write my anthology of poems. I just wanted to quote to you a statistic. In Zimbabwe, the Masa Project recorded between the 30th of March and the 7th of October, 5,306 cases of domestic violence. 6% of those, 318, were against men, women being violent towards their husband, because it records that over 90% of the crimes were committed by an intimate partner. Now, my book, my anthology of poems, really talks about social ills and a lot about domestic violence. There's a section that we wrote that's in the style of Ambudzo Marachera, so it's very unapologetic, very raw, as is domestic violence. Today marks United Nations start of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So though I'm talking about my book, I'm talking about the two together to say as my book title says, speak, we need to speak out more about that. For me, the artistic expression was a way of me to what I'm passionate about, which is still development and development for our nations, to deal with a real important challenge that our country faces.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. And I know that not being able to host, Kites for Peace events during lockdown was, very tough for you. Let's talk about that and maybe the future for the events.
Yeah, actually, again, like the silver lining, we had no choice. It was like, how I say, you can't fight the weather. When it's cold out, you put on a jacket. When it's raining, you take out your umbrella. You just go with it. You can't. It's the things that you can't fight. So we went with it. We had an absolutely amazing virtual event where we encouraged people to fly kites by themselves and with their family and within their social bubbles. And this was an opportunity again that we would have never had. And now that we've seen that works, we can actually have participants from all over the world in future events. So again, and what was really nice about that as well is we could invite other countries and say, look, you can have your own little virtual Kites for Peace festival and encourage people to fly kites. So this year we had Nigeria, we had Tunisia, we had Reunion Island. They all participated, and yeah, it was amazing. I mean, everybody was safe, and we basically flew kites with the world, and the message of peace. So it's not only about flying kites. That's just the physical part of it. But the message of peace was carried with us. And we all share the same sky. When your kite is flying, it doesn't know whether it's flying above Zimbabwe or whether it's flying, somewhere in Europe or wherever. So, I think it was quite fitting as a universal message. And it took something like a global lockdown to kind of open this possibility and to open our eyes to this idea of including people, and especially diasporans. And they always say, "Oh, I'm going to plan a trip, to Zimbabwe when it's kind of peacetime." And you don't really need to. You can do it virtually. So yeah, I think that's the future. Again, is virtual kite festival. Why not?
No more. Fantastic. Thank you. And our time is fast run out on us now. Seeing we just need to just wrap this up. So I'll just ask you, Soraya, first with your final contribution, your final remarks. Then we'll go to Tendai.
So I think my final piece of advice to everybody is roll with the punches, be adaptable to change, always look for the positive, always look for opportunities and ways that you can lace your activities with joy, and just kind of try to flip your perspective into the positive light.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And tonight, your final words.
I would say innovation is the new normal. So whatever business you're involved in, innovate. If it's personal development, innovate. Try something new. Do something new. Let not this season be just about locking down and locking out.
Thank you very much. And you just inspired me to. Just remind me of a quote that I saw that I posted a couple of years ago. It came up in my timeline again. And I think this is something that we need to look at, when we talk about innovation, on the levels. And it says that the birth of the incandescent light bulb didn't come by the continuous improvement of candles. So I think this also fits in totally describe what you said, that
I like that.
we can't go back to the old way of life. It's impossible. We will be regressing if we, just say, okay, this was just a stop there. Now let's get back to reality. So innovation definitely is the way to go. Thank you very much, ladies, for taking time to be with me on the show today.
Thanks so much, McDonald.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Soraya,
Thank you, McDonald.
Thanks, Tendai. Soraya Esso, founder and director of Kais for Peace Zimbabwe, as well as Tendai Emmanuel, Sustainable Development Goals Specialist, philanthropist, as well as author, currently chairs the Magdalena Foundation, the biggest charity in the United Kingdom, taking care of the marginalized communities. The second time is we looked at the issue of surviving and thriving during and post-COVID. And I think the underlying thing that came out of this conversation, if you can take anything away, is innovate or get extinct. I didn't want to be too blunt and say innovate or die, but that's the reality of it. That's just innovate or get extinct. And remember, you can also participate in terms of this particular conversation. Fill in your comments, your posts, and share it, as well as go on the UN75.online website, www.un75.online. Fill in that survey, get to express your views about what you feel about the lockdown, about the health situation across the world, in your town, wherever you are, and let's get to make this world a better place. It's been great being with you, and thanks for joining us today. Until the next series of webinars, remember, this is the start of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Let's stop violence in all its forms. Many thanks for being with us. My name is McDonald Gurura. Until next time, goodbye.